Good morning, everyone. I am very delighted to be here, so I want to extend my appreciation for the invitation. So thank you so much. Bobby, thank you for the coordination, and I'm glad to be with you all this morning. So as Bobby mentioned, I'm Nika White, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion with the Greenville Chamber of Commerce, and I have a lot that I want to share with you today. I was so excited to get the invitation because talking about diversity and inclusion, which I view as very much a leadership function, and how in which it meshes with the discipline of communications it excites me, and you'll soon see why. But my objective for the next 45 minutes to an hour, including our Q&A, is to help PR practitioners and communications professionals to think more intently about how can we leverage diversity and inclusion to help us be more effective marketing partners to our clients, whether internally or externally. And so that is my goal for today. And so we're going to dive right in. And I'll skip this one because Bobby has already given us the instructions for tweeting your questions. And then again, if please feel free to stop me. I don't mind at all if you have a burning question that you want to address. I want to give you a little bit of information about my background because I think that it will help frame our conversations for today. My experience certainly has shaped a lot of the perspective that I have around diversity and inclusion, and specifically diversity and inclusion in the space of marketing communications. And so I want you to have that benefit of understanding what those elements are. My professional career spans about 18 years working as a marketing communications professional. I spent about 15 years working in that industry. Specifically, I transitioned directly from Irwin Pillen Advertising. That was one of my first jobs out of college. And I absolutely love the field of advertising and marketing. I love the strategic process, the creative process. I love working with clients, the culture of the agency. I really felt that I was in my element and that I was going to be doing that for the rest of my life. And I remember one day sitting in my office, and I had this epiphany that I'll tell you about in just a moment, but it changed my life, and that is actually what drew me to the space that I'm in now. Again, I mentioned before that I believe diversity and inclusion is a leadership function. And so if you are a leader, then I believe that D&I should automatically be a part of your consideration set and how in which you govern yourselves within your professional life. And so I have the privilege of being able to talk, train, and consult with a lot of different organizations. And I really have just a passion for this space. I will also share with you that I'm a fourth-year doctorate student, so I'm at the ABD stage, which is all but dissertation. So a lot of my research is centered around some of the information that I will share with you today. I am really big on data, really big on getting to the crux of the matter and digging deep. I don't believe in being a surface D&I practitioner, and so some of that will come out for today. I believe that's the best way in order to get to change. And so, as I mentioned, currently my role now is VP of Diversity and Inclusion with the Greenville Chamber. I have done a number of work with a variety of clients, as you can see here, around the corporate, educational, and government nonprofit sector, and really enjoy that. So I want to get back to this epiphany that I had a few years back, actually several years back. I was sitting in my office at Irwin Pillen years back, and I had been there for a number of years, maybe about 7 or so years, and I felt really fulfilled. I remember literally thinking, I love my job. I love this industry. I love everything about it, everything that I do. The clients that I work for, my colleagues, the creative, strategic process, I was in my element. And I remember sitting down one day, and I thought, well, if I love this career path so much, why aren't there others that look like me that's also taking advantage of this wonderful career path? And I couldn't let that thought go. It stuck with me for quite some time. And so I want to show you some pictures. These are some pictures from me and some of my colleagues when I worked in that field. I think this may have been like an Addy Award. All of you are familiar with those types of initiatives. And as you can see, really tight-knit group. Some of these folks, you may recognize their faces. But had such an enjoyable time. I spent a number of years also on the American Advertising Federation Board of Greenville. Really enjoyed that. That's during the time that I served in that capacity. Again, me with some of my other teammates. And the point of showing you these pictures is that for the most part, there were no others that looked like me. And when you couple that with the fact that we are in an industry where our clients, consumer constituencies, represent diverse America, you can't afford not to consider what do we need to do to be more intentional about leveraging diversity and inclusion to help our clients reach their business objectives. And so I saw it as a key opportunity. This is us, my team, celebrating with one of our teammates at the time that was expecting. And when I recognized there was an opportunity, this is what I began to focus on, this picture. Really aligning myself with different efforts and initiatives to really help diversify the workforce and the industry. I remember I had a really good rapport, and I still do to this day, Joe Irwin, who was very hands-on in the advertising world. I even recall every Monday morning we had staff meetings, and even when the staff was like 400 plus employees, he would lead that meeting, so very much hands-on. But I remember going to him, and I expressed the fact that I see an opportunity for us. He listened very intently, was extremely supportive, and then he asked the million-dollar question. I was prepared for everything for that conversation except for this next question. He said, "This is great. I certainly agree, and we're going to do it, and you're going to lead it. Now tell me how." Now, what I did know is that I needed to get really smart really quick and put wonderful people in my network that could help guide me and navigate me on this pathway of now what do we do to help become more intentional and forward-thinking around the work of diversity and inclusion. You know, I knew at that time that the industry in general was really challenged from an advertising perspective. I knew that if you were to go to the advertising capitals of the world like Chicago or New York, you know, you had the Attorney General knocking on the offices of all those agencies, and they were basically saying, we need to diversify this workforce, and this is not a suggestion. This is, in essence, a requirement. And we're going to be back in about 6 months or so, and we want to see how you're doing. Now, of course, they were not at all thinking about South Carolina, you know. Not at all. They started with those larger markets. But as I was talking with Joe, I remember sharing with him, you know, our big, hairy, audacious goal at that time was to become the most admired agency in the Southeast. This is before they had an office in New York. And I remember thinking to myself, if that's our goal, let's not wait until someone knocks on our door to tell us that we have to now start doing some things. Let's be very proactive. And there's a huge business case for it. Our clients expect us to be able to be very effective marketers to all constituents. And so we need to make sure we have that level of diversity here within our workplace. And that was the start of where I became really drawn to diversity and inclusion. That's where I felt that I kind of found this additional passion and love. And so I then started serving in a dual role. I was management supervisor, still working on a client services end, but then also diversity and inclusion management work that I was doing for the organization. So I share all of that to say, this is where I focus, and that's my journey as to how I got into this space. So there are four main things that I want us to talk about today as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and particularly D&I in the space of communications. And the first is the importance of valuing human difference. I think that that's where we have to start. If you value human difference, you will find that intentionality around really trying to create acceptance and belongingness will come pretty natural. The second is we really need to shift the paradigm from obligation to opportunity. I think so oftentimes there's resistance because people see operating effectively in the space of diversity and inclusion that it requires an obligation because we just have to do it because it's the right thing to do. But if we can shift people's minds to think about it from a standpoint of how does this better our organization and help us to reach our goals and our mission, then it becomes so much easier. You're able to get people on board to be able to gain that momentum and that traction that you need. You'll hear me use the word intentionality, some variation of that several times today. That is my absolute favorite word in the vocabulary. I think that the word intentionality, it leads to results. Because if you're focused on making something happen, something will happen. I truly believe that something will happen. And then the last thing we're talking about is just fostering inclusion and belongingness. Because even once you decide to create this very diverse workforce, if you're not intentional to make sure those individuals feel like they can contribute and bring their whole selves to the organization, then you're not really fully leveraging the diversity that's there. So this is very much internal and external approach, and I think that the benefit to each of you is that you can take some of this information back and be able to not only help influence your clients and internally or externally so that they can understand what is the benefit here, what is the business case, but also so that you can become a more astute professional, PR professional in the role that you serve within your respective organizations. So what looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. I think that clarity is the best form of persuasion. Oftentimes when organizations are not really moving forward in the space of D&I, it's because there's just a lack of know-how. And you don't know what you don't know. So if we can add clarity to it and take away all of the mystical or the misinformation that's out there, then I believe that we can help organizations to be very effective. And so what I'm going to ask you to do today is let's start with zero-based learning. This is what I call ground zero. We're going to unlearn misinformation so that we all will have common knowledge and foundation for how we need to move forward. So we're going to dive right into the first one, the first principle that I mentioned, which is valuing human difference. One of the things that I have noticed is that we have, for whatever reason, as a society, and we're getting better, but we still are at this place where when we think about diversity and inclusion, we tend to limit the context of diversity and inclusion to race, gender, and age. And the point of putting this slide up there is to show that there are so many different layers of diversity and inclusion. And all of them are extremely important. And so when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we have to make sure that we're thinking a lot more broadly around what are those elements that causes us to exist as a diverse society. And as you'll see, it's sexual orientation, it's your mental, your physical abilities and characteristics, it's your thought leadership, it's your marital status, it's whether or not you are a parent. I can remember working in advertising, there was a little bit of notion that the folks who were single, didn't have kids, didn't have a husband, that you were kind of expected to stay late because, well, what do you have to do? You have no life, right? And some of those individuals kind of resented that, and I can understand why. And so we have to consider all of those dynamics when we talk about diversity and inclusion, particularly in a workplace. It could also be your geographic location, your religious beliefs, your political affiliation, your communication style. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But I will say this, although I'm very much interested in seeing us to enhance and become more sophisticated in our defining diversity and inclusion, I always counsel to attack the optics. And let me tell you what I mean by that. If you are a leader in the space of diversity and inclusion, and you go to market with that message that we value diversity and inclusion, you are sending the message that you value it so much that you are very intentional at looking at every key operational aspect of your organization to make sure that you're aligning with those principles. But if people optically cannot see that, it's going to be hard for them to be convinced that you really are operating very effectively in diversity and inclusion. So I always tell people, attack the optics, because once you attack the optics, that is where you're then able to start really getting down to the crux of the matter and dealing with other more systemic issues and opportunities. So let's take the workforce, for example. If you have a very homogeneous workforce, but you're going to market saying we are leaders in diversity and inclusion, can you imagine how that may land on someone who's actually looking at maybe your website, who they see when you bring all of your staff to a particular event, or maybe they come to your office and they're looking around? They can tend to question that. And I always tell people this is not at all to say that we need to do anything outside of making sure that we have a very diverse applicant pool. Always, 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 hands down, hire the best person for the job. Where I find that many organizations are challenged is when they are not very intentional about ensuring there is a diverse applicant pool. The days of build the building and the people will come, put it on the website and people will come, it's no longer. Being intentional means taking that a step further and helping to cultivate relationships with underrepresented populations that are not a part of your organization, whether it's from a consumer or from a staff standpoint. So just keep that in mind. Attack the optics. So what are we trying to accomplish exactly when we talk about diversity and inclusion? Not a world where differences don't matter, but one where differences that matter a lot and that make us better. I often hear people, and they're well-intended, and I certainly understand the context of this statement, but they'll say, I don't see color. I just see a person. And I always think to myself, well, I hope that you recognize I'm African-American female. But the point here is that we should not be conditioned to train ourselves to not see the differences, because if we don't see those differences, we aren't able to leverage them. And the whole point about diversity and inclusion is leveraging those differences so that the totality of all of our contributions together is at its optimal level. So recognize those differences. And I can appreciate when organizations do that. So I want to share this with you. I mentioned that I'm really big on data. So there's this research study that was done, and they surveyed 3,000 employees in 20 large U.S. organizations across 10 separate industries. Each organization, from their website, they had a statement, commitment to inclusion. So they had a very clear diversity and inclusion statement. Yet, 61% of the survey participants said that they had faced overt or implicit pressure to cover in some way who they are or to downplay their differences from the mainstream. 61% of the survey participants. And then 66% of these employees said that it significantly undermined their sense of self. 50% stated that it diminished their sense of commitment to the organization. So not being able to bring your full self to the organization diminished their commitment and productivity to the organization. And some of the reasons that were cited from the survey is, the fear of being different. It stifles your talent. It causes you to not be able to bring your full self into your work environment. And so we have to be mindful and try to minimize habits like self-censorship. We don't want everyone to conform. We need for people to feel comfortable to express their perspective. That banter, that great debate is how we get to great problem solving. We need to make sure that people don't feel obligated to play into some type of expectation of them just because the majority are thinking that way or they're behaving that way and acting that way. So I thought that was really telling. Here's some of the other points that came out of the survey. 29%, they altered their attire, their grooming, or their mannerisms just to make their identity less obvious. 40% refrained from behavior commonly associated with a given identity. 57% avoided sticking up for their own identity group. And then 18%, they limited contact with members of their identity group because they did not want that level of association. Just ponder that for a second. Think about the mentality of the person that's in that predicament, that is capable and willing to contribute at a high level, but they're not doing so because they feel stifled, because they need to conform to what's happening within that organization based upon the mainstream majority. And I use those words very loosely. So the point here is that we must foster difference, but in a way that adds value. And we must help our clients to see the need in doing the same thing. Again, when I say clients, I do refer to both internal and external clients. Because if we don't, then this is what we get. We get dysfunctional agreement or dysfunctional disagreement. And let me tell you, both are very dysfunctional. And it's counterproductive. So we have to make sure that we are minimizing those habits. Let me tell you what dysfunctional disagreement looks like. And some of you may nod your head at this. It's where everyone in the group, they always disagree. You never can get any type of consensus at all. Lack of trust. There's no trust, so you really can't fully engage because you can't trust the folks that are within this circle that you're collaborating with. It's a personal conflict issue that continues to keep surfacing within this conversation. Even though somebody may not very explicitly say it, you can sense that that's there. It's definitely the conflict is there. It's a us versus them. We against you. It's not a me or it's not a we or an us in this together. It's friction there, very much so. On the opposite end of that, dysfunctional agreement is when everyone always agrees. Whatever the most senior leader person says, everyone else nods their head and say, this is great, yes, we agree. There's lack of honesty in that because we always don't agree with what everybody says all the time. But sometimes we bite our tongue and we feel like we don't want to really expose that information out of fear of being perceived in a different light. But again, what we're looking for are those differences. We avoid conflict altogether, and then we have the meeting after the meeting to talk about what happened in the meeting. And then even before we get to the meeting, there have already been several meetings ahead of that meeting to talk about what we want everyone to say in the meeting and to agree with. And so, yes, meetings before meetings, meetings after meetings. We don't want either one of these. And so what we have to do is shift the paradigm from obligation to opportunity. And I want to talk about what this looks like. There are 3 C's, and this is how I refer to an organization's level of commitment and approach to diversity and inclusion. The first C is compliance. This is where those organizations are forced to do what they need to do. And oftentimes it ends up being the bare minimum just to make sure you are compliant or that you are legal or that you are avoiding any type of lawsuits or issues that really could cause the organization to become compromised. When organizations are driven by the need to be compliant and forced to do things, I tend to find that there's a low level of priority given to diversity and inclusion. They do the bare minimum. Now, the step up from that would be character reasons. You are driven to be a leader in the space of diversity and inclusion and do what you can as a leader because you just see it as the right thing to do. We need to do this. You know, it has to happen. I'm not thinking about anything else but the fact that it's just, you know, we're a great moral organization. We believe in it. We need to do this. And so it becomes a moral imperative. You know, you think about your code of ethics. You want to make sure you're living up to that. You want to make sure that you are a corporate citizen. And so when organizations tend to place character or the nice to do as the reason for engaging in diversity and inclusion, there tends to be medium level of priority given. This is where I like to encourage organizations to plant their tent, because this is where I feel there is a significant difference in making stuff happen. When you engage in diversity and inclusion, whether it's yourself or your clients, because of commerce, because of the opportunity, you desire to do diversity and inclusion. You desire to practice with great level of diligence being a leader in the space of D&I because you see the benefits of increased revenue. You see the benefits of productivity in terms of your talent that you can attract and retain within your organization and their output. And it's a lot more innovative approach. And so when organizations are driven by the business case, commerce for diversity and inclusion, they tend to place high priority on it. This is where I encourage organizations to, again, to plant their tent. And so as we talk about shifting the paradigm, one of the things that organizations will ask themselves, and this leans more towards the obligation approach, is what the organization should do to advance diversity and inclusion. What can we do to make diversity and inclusion exist and for people to foster it, to embrace it, and to accept it? If you view it as an opportunity, again, which is shifting the paradigm, then the question becomes, what can diversity and inclusion do to advance the organization? What's the benefit for us? What's the outcome for us? Again, that's thinking about it from a business case and commerce perspective. We're going to move to the next point, the next principle, and this is fostering inclusion and belongingness. And it's not enough. I started with underscoring the significance of creating this very diverse atmosphere and inclusive work environment. But even once you have that level of diversity, which by the way is just a mixture of, or a point at which things differ, diversity exists without us having to do anything. But that's not enough. We have to make sure that if we're leveraging the benefit of having all of that diversity and that difference in our organizations, that we have to make sure those individuals are not conforming, that they really feel like they can bring their full selves to the organization. So belongingness is extremely important. We just talked about dysfunctional agreement and dysfunctional disagreement. So we address that dysfunction by placing high emphasis on uniqueness and belongingness. I want to define inclusion before we move forward. And by the way, I view diversity and inclusion as a pair. You can't separate the two. It's like Tom and Jerry, peanut butter and jelly. Whatever your two favorites are, you know, just get that in mind. They have to go together. And the reason why is because, again, I just mentioned that diversity is simply the mixture or the point in which things differ, and we don't have to make that happen. It already exists. However, inclusion is the action part of it, and this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where really the difference makes a difference. It is when organizations or individuals are so intentional about leveraging the differences in a way that is beneficial to the organization as a whole, to that particular relationship, in order to meet the main objectives. And so there's a clear benefit, and because you recognize there's a clear benefit and opportunity, you are very intentional. And so I wanted to share that with you. Here's also what inclusion looks like. It's where everyone counts, and more importantly, everyone knows and feels that they count. Okay, it's one thing to say you all matter, but everybody, the culture of the environment has to allow you to feel that way. Ability to contribute to one's full potential. I recognize what you bring to the table, and whether or not you serve in that discipline, you have a perspective, yes, we want to hear that. We want to have some conversation, dialogue around that. And then the ability to leverage diversity and unleash talent. Again, talent is really important, but if everybody's thinking alike, then no one's really thinking, right? No one's really thinking. So this is what inclusion looks like. Another survey that went out, I pulled some verbatims from it because these are some comments that the survey participants shared in terms of what does inclusion look like and feel like to you. One of the first things was being at home. I don't know about you all, but when I'm at home, I feel extremely comfortable. I am in my space. I don't feel like I have to pretend to be someone else. I'm just comfortable, you know? So imagine having to step outside of your house and not to have that same level of comfort about your identity within an environment. So that's what it means to them, is to feel at home. Belonging. I'm here, I'm accepted, I belong here. I don't have to prove that I belong here, but I do belong here, and I feel that others believe that I belong here. Able to bring my whole self to work. Think about your identity, and we have so many different identities that each of us have that creates our makeup. If you sense that whenever you had to leave your house, you had to put this on the shelf, this part of your identity on the shelf, and this part of your identity on the shelf, and then go to work, and then come back, and then pick up this part of your identity, and this part of your identity, that wears on people. And it certainly impacts their productivity and their willingness and their ability to contribute at a high level. And so you want people to feel like they can bring their whole self to work without having to shelf some portion of who they are. Feeling that my unique contribution was valued. You didn't ask just because it was a formality you had to ask. You really considered my input. You really considered my input. And then my perspective is always considered. I have a say in what happens. That's what it looks like. So you can't have one without the other. They both go together. I want to show you a couple grids to just group precisely where different attributes fall in terms of how work environments sometimes will be executed around the collaboration with groups. And I want to start with the model. So inclusion is the model. This is where individuals treated as an insider, and they're allowed and encouraged to retain their uniqueness within the work group. This is what we want for everybody. This is high value and uniqueness and high belongingness. The next one is exclusion. This is what we don't want. This is low belongingness and low value and uniqueness. This is where the individual is not treated as an organizational insider with unique value in the work group, but there are clearly other employees or groups who are insiders. This is where you have your cliques, and you are very clear that those cliques exist, and you're not in the in-group. We don't want that. Differentiation. This is high value but low belongingness. This is where the individual is not treated as an organizational insider in the work group, but their unique characteristics are seen as valuable and required for the group and organization's success. You see the difference there? And then the last one is assimilation. This is where the individual is treated as an insider in the work group when they conform to the organization or the dominant culture norms and downplay their uniqueness. That's not what we want. So inclusion is where we want to be. I love this quote: if you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. I always tell folks that people are well-intended. Sometimes our actions, they don't necessarily occur to us that how it's landing on someone else or how it's impacting another person. And so we have to make sure that even though we have a lot of unconscious biases, that we're not allowing that to unintentionally exclude some folks. So practice intentionality. Diversity is happening. You heard me mention this before. Over 70%, over the age of 70, 20% right now are people of color. Under the age of 10, 70%. That says something very important. 48% of the largest cities are predominantly minority. 80 million boomers are set to retire over the next 20 years. And then 75% of the new entrants into the workforce will be women and people of color. Millennials are taking over. They are. They're taking over, and I mean that in a good way. We just have to get prepared for that. The changing face of America. Last week, we had a great demographer that came in. His name is Dr. William Fry. He's with the Brookings Institute. And he came in, and he's actually the author also of Diversity Explosion. But he shared this wonderful research that it was so compelling around how soon we're not going to see a racial majority. It's going to become even more of a melting pot than what it is, and the implications of all of that we need to consider right now. So let's take, for example, the multicultural growth. Hispanic population is anticipated to double from 15 to 30% by 2050. The African American population is projected to increase from 41.1 million to 65.7 by 2050. The Asian American population, 5.1% to 9.2 by 2050, and then 40% of millennials are multicultural. So this is what practicing intentionality means. You have to assume the best intentions of employees. People don't know what they don't know. We have to teach, we have to educate, we have to help them to conclude why diversity and inclusion should play a role into the organization. We have to build a culture where people are wanting to collaborate effectively with each other because they are inviting and welcoming of different perspectives. Take steps to minimize unconscious biases. They exist, and we have to make sure that we are checking our own internal records because we all have them, but we have to make sure that we are aware of them so that we can try to diminish them impacting negatively others that we work with. Cultivate the next wave of leaders. I just told you that, who the next wave of leaders are. We need to be paying attention now. How do we bring them along? How do we cultivate those leaders into who's going to be part of our workforce in a much more significant way? And then treat diversity and inclusion as a leadership function. I like to say that inclusion is like exercise. It's not easy work, but certainly if you stay at it, you can see that results will be achieved. It takes time to recognize the need. It takes time to see the results, and you must believe that there are results and benefits. That's extremely important. And you can't stop or you will lose progress. We have to keep going. You know, I always like to share with folks that when I started at the Chamber, I came into somewhat of a challenging situation because historically the Chamber has not always operated very effectively in the space of diversity and inclusion. Not because the Chamber didn't want to, but more so because the Chamber is a nonprofit. They operate very lean. And so what happens when you operate very lean, and many of you will recognize this because either your clients or maybe even your organizations, what happens is you tend to have someone on staff that you may give them the responsibility of diversity and inclusion, but if it's not their primary responsibility, it falls by the wayside. And there's a lot of starting and stopping, starting and stopping. That's what happened to us. And that hiatus created a lot of challenges to be able to overcome that. We also need to make sure that we recognize that it takes time to see the results, believe in the benefits, that you can't stop or you'll lose progress, and that starting is easier than staying at it. And it involves change. Just like exercise, it involves change. I'm going to pause here, and we're going to take questions at this time. And I saw your hand up, Robin. Go ahead.
So when you went to the Chamber, they were looking for someone to really take the whole diversity program to another level. Did they create the term inclusion, or did you? Because I remember when you first announced your title, I thought, that's interesting. I had not heard that before. And from your presentation, you said it's like Tom and Jerry. They must go together.
They must go together.
Is this your concept, and is it is it growing nationwide, or is it still just diversity throughout?
You know, well,
can you repeat your question?
Sure.
Tell us who actually.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure if I know everyone. I don't know everyone's names, but I know Robin Zimmerman. So Robin asked the question about the use of the phrase diversity and inclusion, and she was very interested in, when I first came to the Chamber, was that something that they had come up with in terms of the title, if that's something that's pretty common, you know, within the industry in general, or of D&I practitioners. And so the answer to that is you will find that there is a growing trend, and it's becoming even more prevalent for organizations to refer to their D&I practitioner by using both terms. And a lot of that is because of what I mentioned before. Diversity is just, you know, it's happening. It's nothing you need to do. Inclusion, you certainly have to be very intentional about it. So the Chamber story is quite interesting in that this was a newly created position. It never existed before, and they had a team of people that collaborated on, you know, identifying what does success look like for a chamber or economic development organization in the space of D&I. And so they did a benchmark study, went all across the United States, and came back with great data. This is why data is important. But they came back with this great data, presented it to the board, and at the end of that, what they discovered was there were two leading themes that the organizations who were being effective in D&I from a chamber or economic development standpoint had facilitated. The first was they had a person at a senior level that was dedicated strictly to the role of D&I to help drive strategic change from the top down, and implementing and executing that. And then secondly, those organizations also had a very deliberate plan, strategic plan for D&I built into their overarching strategic plan. And so it was a part of the organization. And so, you know, I was fortunate in that that was not a battle that I had to fight. You know, I think that I would have thought very differently. It certainly would have been a conversation had it not have been fully encompassing of both elements. So one of the things that I brought to the Chamber is that they really wanted to execute this program, this Minority Business Accelerator program. Great program, by the way, and we did execute it. But I indicated that we can certainly address some opportunities with a program, but more importantly, we need to make sure we're looking internally, we're looking at our operations, we are making it a D&I part of the fabric of the organization, and we're creating this culture to where whatever type of initiatives and strategic plans that we will implement, they can be sustained. And so I hope that answers your question.
All right, I'm going to jump in and ask a couple questions.
Sure, from the Twitter. Great.
Awesome. So Penny Cothran posed this question on Twitter. Is diversity ever mistaken for inclusion?
Yes, all the time. And that's why I spend so much time today really talking about the difference. Again, when someone says, I welcome diversity, we welcome diversity, I know what they mean. They certainly don't discriminate. They have, practices to where they allow all types of people to go through the process. But where you really see the big difference is when someone is being intentional enough to create specialized strategies and tactics to really make sure that you are closing the gap where you may see that there's a need to do so. So people mistake the two all the time.
Question back here.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Auntie Dawkins, and I hope I asked this question correctly, but one key point that you mentioned was that so many organizations, they say that they promote diversity and inclusion, but the first thing that people go to is their website. And so they see people that don't look like them, and so that automatically makes them feel as if, okay, so when you say that we promote diversity, is it diversity amongst our team, or is it diversity amongst our client base?
Sure.
So people use that term loosely as if they're saying diversity amongst our team. The collaborations that we do. And I just need to kind of understand, what does that really mean when they say we promote diversity, and you don't see that as the first
Sure.
subject on your website?
So I'll do my best to kind of rephrase this question. So it sounds like you're really interested in understanding how organizations will reconcile really what diversity is and how they define it. And some organizations may do it by the workforce, their team, and then others may do it by the constituents that they service. And so the answer to that is it varies. I always tell people that you have to do an assessment of your own organization and determine what your goals are, what's your mission and your purpose for even operating in the space of D&I, and then let that govern your plan and your execution and your strategies and your tactics. And so for me, though, I think that it's extremely important to deliver upon being a leader in the space of D&I. Again, I kind of mentioned the phrase of I'm not one of those D&I practitioners that is very surface. I believe in getting to the crux of the matter. And so, if you are manufacturing something that could potentially be misleading through pictures on your website, then you are setting people up for have their expectations not to be met. And so I think that you have to be realistic with where you are. I so much have greater appreciation for organizations that will very blatantly say, we're not where we need to be. So we're on this journey right now to try to diversify because we recognize that we need it. We're not there yet, but we're here, and we're wanting to try to change that. I feel like people can appreciate that more than to try to create this facade of some level of inclusion or diversity that may not exist. But that's why I also say attack the optics, because people do visit certain websites and talk to certain folks to understand. People want to know, I'm going to go to a place and be a part of an organization where others I can identify with because they look like me. That's just our common nature.
All right, we got a question from Twitter.
Okay, sure.
We'll stand next to you.
That's fine.
So this is from Ashley Dunsbury from the Midlands. She asked on Twitter, this kind of backs up what you kind of asked, but maybe get a little bit more very specific if you could.
Okay.
What are the best practices for diversity and inclusion to integrated from top down and bottom up in an organization? Can you think of maybe one or 2 points that we could take away?
Absolutely. You have to have buy-in and definitely senior level commitment. I would say that without that, oftentimes the process will be very slow, and you may find that it will stall, and it's already really hard work, and so if you don't have that, it's going to make it even more difficult, which means that people can start to lose that momentum. And so you have to start. That's why the first thing that I wanted to do when I was establishing this initiative at Irwin Penland was, went straight to Joe Irwin. And that was necessary, and he provided full support. And in fact, when we established our council, we had 7 members on the council, on the 12 to 15 member council that were senior leaders in very influential roles. And so that's one, you have to have senior level support. The next thing is you can't treat diversity and inclusion and be effective at it as a separate program that's off by itself in the back corner office. It can't be the responsibility of one person. You can have one person that champions the role and helps to facilitate it, but that's their role, is to help to facilitate, not execute everything imaginable that could be related to diversity and inclusion. It's always interesting to me, sometimes the things that come to my desk, and I understand why. And again, I always extend such great grace to people because people don't know what they don't know. But if it's anything related to diversity and inclusion, sometimes it tends to hit the desk of the person with the title diversity and inclusion. One of the things that I like to do in organizations, which I think is a really great best practice, is to make sure that department heads, department team members are owning responsibility for creating diversity and inclusion goals and executing them within their respective areas. When I was developing the overarching plan for the Greenville Chamber for D&I, first of all, it was part of the main plan. But then secondly, Nika, I didn't come up with what those goals are across departments. I sat down with each department head and I allowed them to feel empowered, and I said, use me as a resource. I'm in this role, I have that title, but use me as a resource. I'm here to support your efforts. What do you deem to be some important goals and tracking for your department? And let's work on that together. And what happens is they then own it. And when they own it, they are more accountable for it. Something else we did was we built it into the performance evaluation. So as they were having their review process, the same goals for all the other areas that they were identifying, the D&I goals were in there as well. And there were conversations around how are we doing in this area? How are we tracking? What have you put in place to try to make sure that you're reaching those goals? How do you need help? What kind of support services can we provide to you? So you have to make it something that everyone shares in and gets senior level support.
Nika, would you go back to the slide with the pie chart, the circle that showed all the different types of diversity?
I absolutely will. I think that was towards the beginning.
So Robin Zimmerman is asking Nika to go back to a slide real quick.
There we go.
So back to the website question. Let's say in your organization you have diversity in age, sexual orientation, different thinkers, different socioeconomic status levels amongst your team. But yet you look on the website and they're all white. But they're very diverse. See, that's where color comes in that bothers me. That they could be very diverse, but the website would only show a Caucasian.
That's a great point, Robin, and I think it goes back to, okay, that's a great point. So Robin is asking the question about, there's so many different layers of diversity that oftentimes what happens is, even though it may be a very homogeneous looking group from an optical standpoint, there's lots of diversity within that homogeneous group, and I use that loosely. So how do we reconcile people not fully being able to understand that that's still diversity? And it's absolutely diversity. Again, I think it goes back to the notion of attacking the optics. And I say that because we are in a society to where we are convinced by what we see, what we believe, and so we have to just be careful of the potential downside or consequence of that. It is going to be really, really hard, this is reality, for an organization to go to market with a strong message of supporting diversity and inclusion as part of who they are as an organization. And for year after year after year after year, for people to encounter that organization and it all still looks the same. And so at some point in time, if you're really that committed, what you're going to do is figure out, well, why are we attracting the same type of people that look alike? What do we need to do to make sure maybe we're reaching out to historically black colleges and universities? What do we need to do to make sure that we have diverse community impact where we're reaching constituents of underrepresented populations so that they know about who we are and our brand and what opportunities we have to offer? It's a different mindset that is required to take that to the next step.
All right, question from Twitter.
Okay.
So I assume pronunciation is Tawana.
Okay.
Tawana Clifton from off of Twitter. Your question is what can diversity and inclusion do to advance the organization? I think it's a good question off of Robin's question. So advancing thinking forward.
Okay, so to advance the organization, leveraging diversity and inclusion, there's a multitude of things that you really could do. The first thing is you could make sure that diversity of thought is included in your team. And it goes back to, if everyone is thinking alike, then no one is thinking. So you want to create that level of collaboration where people are bringing different perspectives and different ideas and thoughts to the table. That's how innovation really is fostered within an organization. Another way that diversity and inclusion helps an organization is that if you're in the business like we're in of communications and you're having to reach different constituents, then you need to understand what resonates with them. And each culture, each audience, demographics, they create a lot of differences in how in which they perceive information, accept information, and how in which they behave. And so, quite honestly, it's going to make you a more effective marketer and partner to your clients, internal and external, that you're servicing. Beyond that, when you think about the richness of just having people that you can connect with to really enhance your experience and give you greater knowledge base of the world in general, that makes a difference. It makes us smarter, it makes us more innovative, it makes us more willing to think more creatively outside of what we normally may do without that level of inspiration that's coming from just the differences of people that are around us. So there are lots of benefits to that. And not only that, from a supplier diversity standpoint, I do a lot of work in that space as well. Oftentimes, your clients will require you, because, again, we want to have those big, large clients that we're servicing that are representing us. They will sometimes mandate, we are a diversity and inclusion leader. We do that across all aspects, including our supplier diversity. So we want to make sure that you, as our partner, you're also extending opportunities to vendors and suppliers that are minority or women-owned, which means you have to have those folks in your constituent base. You have to have them in your network in order to be able to know how to utilize them, how to leverage them. There have been times that clients have been lost because of that, I can tell you.
So, first of all, I want to say thank you to Nika White. Everybody give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
Real quick, a bunch of thank yous and a bunch of notes to wrap up. First is I want to say thanks to Jackson Marketing for allowing us to have this space to do this. They were here early in the morning to make this possible, so we really appreciate them. Second, I want to let everybody know that Nika's video and her slides will be on the SCPRSA website. So that you can follow up and see this again. Finally, real quick, for those in both the Midlands and the Low Country, if you didn't sign in, please sign in. There's a sign-in sheet in each area. Please make sure that you give us your information. Yes, we want to take it from you so that we can send you a link with all the information so that you can see this again. Finally, follow us on our Facebook page so that we'll let you know when it's up. And I'd like to say thank you very much, Nika.
Thank you.
We really appreciate everything. And this is from...
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Awesome. And we're going to hang out just a few more minutes here, but we're going to conclude the live stream. And really want to appreciate everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.